hit record real quick. I forgot that I was supposed to be recording. So many organizations do that, but I think VFA does a nice job of using a variety of different subgroups that they're looking at. And then over the last couple of years, something they did is they identified some early momentum key performance indicators. So if we're looking at student outcomes after 6 years, that's a long time to wait to see how well we're doing. And so AACC partnered with the Community College Research Center to identify early momentum KPIs that would be a good indicator for us to track after that first year, to determine if we're on the right track towards completion. So I'll ask you, for those of you who have been in higher ed for a long time, you'll probably remember back when we were all deeply frustrated by the IPED student right to know completion rates that really didn't reflect our mission. And I think it's important to acknowledge the significant role that AACC and the VFA played in moving that conversation forward, because as some of you know now, IPEDS actually does look at outcomes for students who were first enrolled at the institution and transfer students. So we've really come a long way, I think, in advocating for our sector, in ensuring that more students get counted and they get recognized for the outcomes they've achieved. So let's have a look at the VFA metrics after 6 years. They look at degree completion, and there's actually 4 different categories in there, which is earning a bachelor's degree at a community college. So this isn't earning a bachelor's degree at a university. They look at students who earned an associate degree, and then they also disaggregate that because colleges were interested in what happens to students after they earn the associate degree. So if they did or didn't transfer after receiving that degree. They look at certificate attainment, and again, transferring after earning that certificate, transferring to another institution. Typically, we still identify the students who are still enrolled during that 6th academic year. And then VFA also looks at students who left with greater than or equal to 30 credit hours, or left with earning fewer than 30 credit hours. So those are the categories that they look at after 6 years. I mentioned earlier that VFA also a few years ago started identifying 1-year metrics that were a good indicator of how well, that were highly correlated with success after 6 years. And those fall into 3 main buckets. The first is credit accumulation. So did the student earn 6 or 12 college credits in the first term? Did they meet those credit thresholds? Did the student earn 15, 24, or 30 credits in the first year? So obviously you have to accumulate credits in order to get a credential. And so that's why that credit accumulation is so important. The other metric after 1 year that they looked at is course completion, and particularly in gateway courses. And did the student pass college level math and pass college level English within the first year? And did the student pass college level math and English? So those of you may recall that in the past, we focused a lot on reducing the number of students reducing the incidence of developmental education, or the number of students who are placed in developmental education. And I think the field of dev ed folks helped make that shift to saying, hey, let's not focus on if you got into dev ed. Let's focus on if you got out of dev ed and if you passed that college level course. So in my opinion, that felt like a really refreshing, very asset-based way to focus on students who were underprepared when they came to college. And then finally, the VFA looks at fall to next term retention, and then the credit success rate. So that would be looking at credits attempted and earned to arrive at that credit success rate. The VFA, as I mentioned, also disaggregates by subgroup. Most of these you see in a lot of data reporting, particularly gender, Pell status, and racial and ethnic background. I'm really pleased that the VFA also looks at disaggregates data by full and part-time status, by college readiness, and then also by age. Given that Michigan has recently announced 2 new free community college programs, the Futures for Frontliners program and the Michigan Reconnect program, which are, at least Reconnect is targeted at students that are 25 and older. In my mind, this age data is just perfectly timed for us to take a look at, because we will be, for the first time in a long time, welcoming back, hopefully, a lot more adults to our campuses. Okay, so one of the things that I was asked recently is, how do I define student success? What do I mean by student success? And this is a really complicated question, but I define student success as students who earned a credential, so earned a certificate or a degree. Typically, I would also include that the student transferred, although ideally we would say that the student transferred and earned a credential after they transferred. But when we're looking at data, institution level data, I struggle to assign the starting community college to be responsible for a student graduating after they graduated, because there's another institution involved in that as well. And I also struggle with the defining student success when those credential and degree attainment, we have good measures for. We know what those are. We can clearly put students in those categories. We clearly know, we have good data to suggest when a student transfers, but there are a lot of other outcomes based on the purpose for which the student enrolled in community college that we don't do a good job of capturing. So students may come to our institutions and they want to earn, and they want to be prepared for an industry recognized credential. And they may define that as their own personal success. We don't have an effective way of measuring that, so that we can, if we can't measure it, it's hard to say that students are successful. And I'll talk a little bit about this more later when we're looking at data, is, how can we get to a better sense of what that success would look like. And I'll show you what it looks like right now in the data, and perhaps how we could get to a place where it would look a little bit better. Okay, so how are we going to define it today? So we are going to look at, as you saw earlier, there's a whole bunch of data, right? I mean, we got a lot of stuff that we could unpack here. And we don't have time in our 60 minutes or so together, and I don't have enough slides really to present all of the data here. So I had to select something. So we will be looking at associate degrees and certificates. And the other area I want to focus on is students who left earning less than 30 credit hours. And obviously, I want to be clear, I don't think that that's a success necessarily. There's probably some success embedded within there that we don't measure anywhere else. But you'll see why it's such a valuable metric for us to look at when we're looking at this VFA data. We are going to spend quite a bit of time when looking at passing college level math and English. And part of the reason for this is I think if colleges focused on helping students pass college level English and math in the first year, and focused on ensuring that students get an associate degree, I think all of our outcomes would rise. And this is just a hunch on my part, but I think that I feel like there is that strong correlation between students passing college level math and English and earning a credential at the end as well. So that's kind of where my mind is at on all of this. Okay, so I want to show you why I think that about passing college level English and math by giving you a bit of a preview of some of the data. So why do we care so much about passing college level English and math? Well, here's some data where we're looking at students who got an associate degree and transferred, got an associate degree and did not transfer, transferred with no award, and then students who left with less than 30 credit hours. In the darker blue, we're looking at all students in the cohort. So in the fall of 2013, there were 48,000 students who fell into this cohort. 7,000 of those students passed college level English and math in the first year, and 41,000 did not. And so I want you to scroll over here and then see that if you completed college level English and math, you were maybe four times more likely to earn an associate degree and transfer. If you passed college level English and math in the first year, you were twice as likely to earn an associate degree and not transfer. Relatively about the same percentage of students, 27 and 34%, transferred with no award. Kind of the relationship was not quite as strong between achieving that KPI. But if we look down here at the last column of students who left with less than 30 credit hours, 42% of students who left with less than 30 credit hours did not achieve that KPI, 42% of those students. So I see a strong positive relationship between positive outcomes like earning your associate degree if you achieve that early KPI, but an equally or even stronger relationship between students. If you didn't achieve that KPI, then we're looking at 42% of those students left with less than 30 credit hours, and that's within 6 years. So that means they left with less than 30 credit hours. They never earned a degree. They never showed up at another institution either. So they left with less than 30 credit hours. So I wanted to share that data up front because I think that's really compelling for why these metrics might be interesting for you to track at your own institution. And then we're going to look at a few different data questions today. And so the first thing we want to do is I just want to do big picture, what are our outcomes? And I'm going to launch a poll, and you should see a poll on your screen that says what percentage of students earn a certificate or associate degree within 6 years? Is it less than 15%, 15 to 30%, 30 to 50%, or more than 50%? And about half of people that are on the call have voted. So I'm going to give you about another, oh gosh, we have 80% of people voting. That's great. All right, so I am going to end the polling. You'll have more opportunities to do poll questions, and I'm gonna share the results. Katie, let me know if I'm not sharing the results. There's a lot of buttons to press here. And it looks like about 80% of respondents thought that between 15 and 30% of students earned a certificate or an associate degree within 6 years. So we are going to move on to another question, and I want to ask you about what percentage of students pass college level English and math within 1 year. So some of you may have been joining us for all of our VFA webinars and you already know the answer to this, in which case bonus points for you. You did your pre-reading. But again, less than 15%, 15 to 30%, or 30 to 50% of our students pass college English and math within 1 year. And it looks like we've got about 80% of people voting. So I'm going to end our polling and I'm going to share the results with you. And this time we see about 57–60% of respondents thought that, again, that we were between 15 and 30%. And so I'm going to stop sharing the results and I'm going to share the data with you. So we are looking at the data for the students who completed an associate or a certificate degree. And you'll notice that I provided you with the total number of students in the cohort, and then the number of students that achieve the outcome that's listed there, and then the percentage of the total. So, and then what I did is I combined this percentage of total because I find it to be a little bit hard to read when we're looking at all these outcomes. So most of you were correct. About 20% of our students earn an associate degree or a certificate within 6 years of enrollment, just under 20%. About 29% of our students transfer with no award. So they don't get an award at your institution, but they do transfer to another institution. And that includes transferring to a community college and a university. And then we see that about 9% of students left with greater than or equal to 30 credit hours, and 37% of students left with less than 30 credit hours and didn't show up anywhere else. And 5.8% are still enrolled. So by pretty far, the most common outcome we have is that students leave with less than 30 credit hours. Again, there could be some success embedded within there that we don't measure, but in my opinion, to be considered a success, we have to define what that is, and then be able to report on that as institutions as well. Let's have a look then at that other metric that we want to track, which is passing college level English and math. And I think about 57% of you thought that it was between 50 and 30% of students pass college level English and math, and you're just barely correct. Among students who started in the fall of 2017, just over 15% of those students passed college level English and math in the first year. For those of you who are noticing that I provided you with a couple other data points here, you'll notice that we have a pretty significant distinction between math and English. 43% of students passed English and only 21% of students passed math. And then of course, this percentage is lower because those students, there are clearly some students who passed English but did not pass math, and then vice versa as well. So not everybody passed both, but we see here, we saw a little bit earlier the power that passing college level English and math have in some of those longer term outcomes. So I think it's a really important metric for colleges to track. Okay, so the next poll question that I want to ask you is how well you think we're doing compared to our peers. And so I will launch a poll. Are my institution's outcomes better or worse than my peers in Michigan and nationally? So we've got a few people answering. I gave you, instead of a yes or no, I gave you a little bit of wiggle room in there. If you wanted to respond that we're slightly better, worse, or slightly better, a lot better, worse, or a lot worse. So it looks like we have, again, about 80%. We're up to 90% of people who have responded to the poll. So I'm going to go ahead and end the polling and share the results. And majority of people, about 2/3 of respondents thought that we were doing slightly better. And then 1/3 of respondents were doing slightly worse. So I'm going to stop sharing those results and I'm going to show you what the outcomes look like, kind of. So first of all, I'm not sharing your individual institution's data. So this is motivation for you to go find out who has this VFA data at your institution. so that you can do some of these comparisons. And I am showing you the DevEd data here, the Gateway course data, because I didn't have access to national data on those 6-year outcomes. So I'm still tracking that down. But you'll see here that we don't do quite as well as our peers nationally in the percentage of students who pass college level math. We do better than our peers nationally among students who pass college level English. And we do slightly worse than our peers nationally among students who pass college level English and math. And if Jenny were on the line, I know some of you know my colleague Jenny, who is a former English faculty member at Lake Michigan College and has been leading a lot of the developmental education work in Michigan for the last 10 years or so. And I would probably point out that some of you may recall that Michigan, a long time ago, close to 10 years ago, launched the Accelerated Learning Program, which offers a co-requisite course where students take the college level English course with support instead of doing a 2-semester sequence of developmental English and then college level English. And so we suspect that Michigan's early adoption of the ALP program probably suggests why we see some of the improved outcomes in college level English for students in Michigan compared to our peers nationally. Like I said, I couldn't track down the national data on this, but I do know that Michigan is a highly, we have a lot of students who transfer in Michigan. We have a lot of mobility between institutions in Michigan. And Katie and I have a lot of theories about why that is, untested, of course, just our intuition. But certainly I think geographically, Michigan is the kind of place where we have a lot of colleges and universities, and that's true of the Midwest in general. So we do tend to see a lot more mobility. And we also, as you know, do not have a state agency or a higher education executive officer where, if for those of you who have been in other states, you know that there are typically service regions or boundaries for universities sometimes, and that just really doesn't exist in Michigan. I live in Grand Rapids, and there are 3 public universities in downtown Grand Rapids. And I think I could get a business degree at all of them. So that just lends itself to the kind of mobility that you might not see so much in other states as well. Katie, do you want to add anything else about that?
Just that I'm in Southeast Michigan and we have enough colleges and universities here to educate the entire state.
That's right. Good point. Good point. Yeah. Good. Well, let's continue. And I want to focus some of our time here on looking at our equity gaps. And I am going to launch another poll. And I'm going to ask you, among what groups do you think we have equity gaps? And then in this one, you can actually select all that apply. And then we'll break that down and take a look at some of that data as well. Okay, good. Thank you all for participating in the polls. It's nice to get responses. Okay, we're going to give it one more second. It looks like just about everybody has participated. So I'm going to end the polling and I'm going to share the results with you. So it looks like about 100% of attendees thought that we would see equity gaps among race and ethnicity, 100% of people, and 100% of people thought we would see equity gaps based on college readiness, if the student was college ready or not. Most people thought we would see equity gaps based on Pell status, just with the exception of a couple. A little bit less so based on age. And then less than half of people thought we would see equity gaps based on gender. So let's keep that kind of in mind as we're walking through these data. Oops. Am I still sharing the poll, Katie? Okay. Is it gone now? Okay, it's gone. Great, thank you. Okay, so I did a little trick on you here in terms of the table that I'm showing you. So as I mentioned before, there's a lot of data that we can look at. And so I've tried to narrow it down to something that's more manageable that we can look at on the screen here. And what I wanted to share is I'm actually showing you the transfer data for the students that earned an associate degree and then transferred. The most common associate degree that our colleges award is the associate degree either in general studies or associate in arts or associate in arts and sciences, which is the degree that is intended for transfer. I don't want you to think that I said this because I'm supplying this data to you because I don't think those other things are important, but at some point you just have to have a manageable amount of data that you're looking at. Oops, sorry. And then we have passing college level English and math, and students again. I just continue to think that this is a very important metric for us to track, which are those students who left with less than 30 credit hours, because that's where all of that success could be in there, but we don't know because we don't measure it very well. And so I think you notice and I notice some pretty significant equity gaps that we see in this data here. We see that among all students, about 8% of students transfer after they earn an associate degree, and that varies somewhat by race and ethnicity. I think one thing that's really notable to me that sticks out is only 3.5% of Black students transfer after earning an associate degree. So it's not to say that they don't have other positive outcomes, but only 3.5% transfer. I think that our last two columns over here, our last two metrics are a little bit more sobering than transferring after an associate degree, but we see, as you may recall before, that 15% of students pass college level English and math. But as we look at the disaggregated data, we see especially significant gaps. Only 5% of Black students pass college level English and math. So for those colleges that are really thinking about how can we reform our developmental education programs to get better outcomes overall, so we want to increase the percentage of all students who pass college level English and math, I think it's critically important to say that we really need to look at this because of these equity concerns that we see here. There's just too big of a gap between some of these groups to suggest that what we're doing now is effective for our students. And I strongly encourage institutions to look at these disaggregated outcomes when they're thinking about their reforming their dev ed practices. I know that we at the Center for Student Success will be thinking about that. Many of you know that the Michigan Reconnect Grant Program requires that community colleges who enroll Michigan Reconnect students offer an accelerated pathway through developmental math and English for students who are underprepared. And this will be very much a focus of our attention over the next year. And we will certainly be disaggregating those outcomes when we think about what may benefit students. And then finally, we'll look at the data of students who left with less than 30 credit hours. And again, we see in particular subgroups, and I'll point to Black students, American Indian and Alaskan students, and also the two races and unknown, in addition to the Hispanic students as well, are more likely to leave with less than 30 credit hours. And I think, again, when we think about the fact that there's some success embedded within these students who left than 30 credit hours, or where we think there probably is, it becomes even more important for us to interrogate what's going on within that group of students who left with less than 30 credit hours. Because if there is truly value there, we want to know what that is, and we want to be able to measure that as well. Let's look at Pell status for this same data as well. So this is pretty fascinating. I will say, Katie and I have been looking at these we've done 5 of these webinars now. So we've been combed through all of this data. And I think in the outcomes, 100% of people said college readiness and race ethnicity, we would see equity gap. And then slightly fewer, maybe closer to like 70% of folks said we would see that for Pell status. But this is super interesting. We don't see huge equity gaps among students who were awarded Pell and not awarded Pell. So the first thing I'll point out is that 26 out of the 48,000 students in the cohort, a little over half were awarded Pell and a little under half were not awarded Pell. So it's pretty much like 60-40 if you're kind of looking at those numbers. So it's pretty evenly distributed among our students, but we don't see significant equity gaps here. Although I would probably say down here in less than 30 credit hours, left with less than 30 credit hours, I don't know. I think that's a fairly significant gap there between 40 and 34%. So I'm wondering if in the chat, people could give us some ideas as to why we're not seeing some of those equity gaps in here. One of our assumptions is that there are a lot of students in this bucket. A lot of students in the bucket who were not awarded Pell, who have very similar financial circumstances to students who were awarded Pell, but for whatever reason, they didn't receive a Pell Grant. So there are some, where are my psychometricians out there? Is it a type 1 or a type 2 error where students that were in the not awarded Pell category actually are students who were awarded Pell as well? I think that it is very common. I think the utility of Pell as a metric to measure income is it's not the greatest. I think we know that. And so just kind of keep that in mind as you're thinking about disaggregating your data at your own institution, how much value that has for you. And just kind of have a look and certainly make sure you know how many students were awarded Pell at your institution or were not. So let's take a look at age. I mentioned a little bit earlier that age is increasingly something that we've been focusing on at the center because of the Futures for Frontliners program. And a lot of those students are over the age of 25. And then of course, the Michigan Reconnect students who will have a tuition-free pathway to community college, hopefully beginning next year. This is really interesting because we see as you get older, you are less likely to be successful. And as you get older, you are more likely to leave with less than 30 credit hours. So there seems to be a really strong correlation between age and outcomes. Students who are less than 20 years old are kind of driving those percentages that we see. And to be fair, they are also the majority of the population in this cohort as well. So we are primarily serving students who, when they start with us, are under the age of 20. That's the largest cohort of students that we're serving. And then right after that 20 to 24-year-olds when they started. But I would strongly encourage you, as you're thinking about welcoming those people back, welcoming students who are in the Reconnect program and the Futures for Frontliners program, as you're welcoming them back to campus, to keep this age data in mind, because I think it's very valuable as you're looking at some of your student success efforts. I also think it's critical as you, your student services office, your advising offices are thinking about what services you're providing. Evidence suggests that older students are typically more likely to work, have a family responsibilities, and I think community responsibilities as well. You know, they're being a student is just one identity that they carry with them. And so think about those services and what services you're providing to those students on your campus, and to be able to track that data over time. I want to look at college readiness, and for those students, again, that started in fall of 2013, if they were college ready or not. And when we say college ready, we measure that, or the VFA measures that, by looking at if they had developmental needs in 1, 2, or 3 subjects. And I'm going to show you a little bit more detailed data about this in just a minute, about the DevEd outcomes. But I think one of the observations that we make here is that you are much more likely to transfer after your associate degree, twice as likely to transfer after your associate degree if you're college ready compared to your peers who are not college ready. And you are more likely to leave with less than 30 credit hours if you're not college ready. So that's a group of students that when we think about people leaving with less than 30 credit hours, I think it's important to look at the relationship between college readiness and those leavers as well. And then let's look at, so we were looking at the transfer and the leaving data before. And here we're looking at slightly different data, where I'm showing you where they pass college level English and math, but also math and English separately. And we show the data here for all students, and then we show the data for students who are college ready. And then if they had developmental need in 1, 2, or 3 subjects, and those 3 subjects are mathematics, English, and reading. So it doesn't mean levels below, it means the 3 different subject areas. And I want to draw your attention to the students who had developmental needs in 3 subjects. And I like to think of sometimes I think it's helpful to think of percentages in terms of the number of people out of 100. And so this is really interesting to me. Only 6 out of 100 students who had developmental needs in 3 subjects passed college level math. Only 3 out of 100 students passed college level English and math. But I think we have a really important bright spot here. And we can see that 1 in 4 of those students pass college level English. And I think that really speaks to the power of some of these innovative strategies that we're seeing around co-requisite remediation and enrolling students in that college level course and then providing them support for that. I think that's it's obviously we still have gaps here, you know, compared to students, half of students who had developmental needs in 1 subject passed college level English. But I think this is something that Michigan community colleges should be very proud of, because clearly having developmental need in 3 subjects is a challenge. But I think it speaks to the wonderful things that those in English faculty have been able to do to get students to pass that college level English course. The
Hey,
last poll,
Erica,
uh-huh.
I'll just draw attention to some interesting dialogue in the chat where people are talking about confounding factors around income and FAFSA eligibility, or Pell eligibility anyway, related to FAFSA completion or non-completion, as well as some of the factors around age and the completion of college level math. A good point that sometimes those older students are not necessarily, depending on what their goals are, going to be looking to enroll in some of those college level math courses right off the bat. And then additional discourse that I just wanted, if you're not tracking the chat, folks to know that it's in there. You guys might find it useful to take a look at what's being discussed. And then there's a question here from Beverly about whether we know which colleges were early adopters of ALP and can we compare those institutions with non-adopters?
I'm glad you asked. I do not have that data in front of me, Beverly, but we did look at the data for ALP, what we considered ALP colleges and non-ALP colleges based on the work that we did. Now, not every people could have done ALP, but they didn't do it as part of a project that we had. And we do see significantly higher outcomes for the colleges that adopted ALP. It just, we just do. And again, you could argue that there are other strategies that could work in addition to ALP, but I think we do know that ALP is a very effective model to get students through that college level English course, which makes complete sense, right? Because you're taking the very first class you take is the college level course. So not only I think pedagogically does it make sense, but also you're just, that attrition doesn't happen because this is the class that we're expecting you to pass. So I think there's promising practices there. And of course, we continue to work with the mathematics faculty to a little bit more challenging probably in mathematics, especially in college algebra. We've seen some good success in statistics and quantitative reasoning to co-rec that, a little bit harder in college algebra, but everybody's working to see how we can get there as well. Okay, so last poll question is, have we improved? And you can respond by saying yes, a lot, yes, a little, or I just let you say no. That's okay too. So we'll give you another couple seconds to respond. And it looks like we have a fair number of people. So I'm going to go ahead and end the polling. I'm going to share the results, and 80%, over 80% of folks said, yeah, we've improved, but just a little. So let's have a look. Hold on. Stop sharing results. Okay. So have we improved? So the two of the outcomes that we've talked about, transferring after your associate degree and leaving with less than 30 credit hours, no, haven't really improved. Probably if we were rounding this, all these numbers would be 8%. And actually, we have had more students who have left with less than 30 credit hours among students who started in fall of 2013 compared to students that started in fall of 2011. Now, I know some of my favorite IR folks are on the phone or on the call with us today. And though, as you know, those years, 2011, 2012, 2013, represent the years immediately following the recession, and where we were really, truly not in a normal enrollment pattern. And then here we are again. And we probably don't see a normal enrollment pattern in the fall of 2020. And given the new incentives for students to enroll through the Futures program or for the Michigan Reconnect program, we are in another period of unusual enrollment patterns for students. And there are policy pressures that are probably impacting student enrollment behavior. But I think that that's just something that we obviously have to live with. If I could control the economy, I would, but I can't. And so I recognize I will be very interested as we begin to get data for fall of 2014, which we should be getting. I think we're reporting that now. Well, I'm not going to do the math. It's late in the day, but I'm very excited to get more of this data and see how we've done. I think particularly for institutions who have been deeply engaged in some student success reform work, whether that be with the Center for Student Success or Achieving the Dream or other organizations, I think we see some changes there. And so I'm looking forward to seeing some of that data in years where we don't have as much of an impact from the economy on our enrollment. But there is a bright spot here as well. And I think, Beverly, this probably speaks a little bit to the question that you had earlier, which is about those early adopters of ALP. And we're looking at the college level English and math outcomes between 2012, and then there's a couple years that skipped here based on when colleges reported data. But we can see that we do see improvement, particularly in college level English, between students in the fall of 2012 and the students in the fall of 2017. I consider that measurable success for some of the work we've done. And we've even seen almost a 3% increase in mathematics. And then of course, that's diluted a little bit when we get over here to the math and English as well. But I do think there's a bright spot. So for those of you who said we've seen a little bit of improvement, you were right. So as usual, I talked the whole time and we don't have a whole lot of time for discussion, but I know there were some good comments that were shared in the chat. But we did want to just provide some ideas for next steps. So the first thing I would encourage you to do is find out who at your college has access to this data for your institution. And so I'd make sure that you access that. You're here today, so you know, you've been exposed to what data are available. But I think it's really critical to pull together a coalition of stakeholders who are really interested in learning more about the data and doing something about it. And knowing most of your institutions, I think there's a lot of people on your campus who would be very interested in this. And I think particularly bringing the disaggregated data to the table is really kind of a game changer for colleges when they're starting to look at what they can do to improve student outcomes. I also think as part of this process, we know, because we've been asking you to participate in a lot of our work over the last 10 years, that you have been doing a lot of stuff. You have been doing you've been implemented new interventions, you've hired new advisors and counselors, you've made really critical policy changes on your campus that have a really positive impact on students. And so I think reflecting on what you've done over the last 10 years or whatever time period you want to identify is really critical. I would also encourage you to reach out to those of us at the Center for Student Success. So I've included our contact information on here. We're always happy to help. We really do love talking with individual colleges and you know, webinars and meetings and conferences are great, but I know that Jenny and Precious probably aren't on the call with us today because they've been doing individual 90 minute to 2 hour individual calls with colleges and about their guided pathways work and their economic stability work and their dev ed work. And I have to say, I'm extremely jealous of them that they get to talk with all of you about the awesome things that you're doing. But you can always contact us. We're always happy to help. We're always happy to help you track down data that might be helpful for you, or also really importantly, connecting you with other colleges that are doing great work as well. So please don't hesitate to reach out to us if you have any other questions. And I know our time is coming to a close. We're already 1 minute over, but at the end of the slide deck, we included some resources for various things we included on our website there. So please feel free to use those resources and let us know if you have any questions. Katie, I'll ask you if there's anything else in the chat that people wanted to share.
I just want to highlight the last comment by Curie from Monroe. Share the data, let people know about it. I know one of the things we've heard throughout the series is some of you don't have access to this data, but you'd like it. And this is a great opportunity to talk with folks on your campus, and whether or not, I mean, we don't like to get involved with in your hierarchical issues on your campuses, but whether or not you can get direct access or you can just request these reports from the folks on your campus who do have the access. It's just helpful that you know about it and you know what kind of data is out there so that you can use it for your own area, or as Curie is recommending, sharing it with other constituents on your campus who might have an interest or may not know about it and could relate to their areas of work.
It's a great point, Katie. I think that's really our emphasis of this webinar series. I think community colleges are data rich and analysis poor. We have like a lot of data. I am always reluctant when people ask me, should we collect more of this data from colleges? I'm like, no, let's use what we have. And then let's start collecting more data. And so really just encourage you to reach out. As Curry said, an IR office of one is not unusual in Michigan. And so be kind to your IR folks, and see how you can partner with them, especially those of you who have a staff that might be interested in this. I always say invite your IR folks to your staff meeting. It can be super helpful to share this information more widely across your campus. So thank you all for joining us, and we'll look forward to seeing you again soon. Always appreciate your feedback if there's any other webinars that you'd be interested in hearing about, especially as it relates to data. So thanks a lot. Bye-bye.